everyone. Thank you for being here. This is the Entrepreneurship Speaker Series, and of course, we are sponsored by Hillcrest Bank. We have an outstanding speaker today, one that a lot of people have been anticipating for a lot of time, myself included. To introduce our speaker today, we have Steve Hitz, who is on the Entrepreneur Leadership Council and is a friend of our speaker, Joseph Grenny. So without further ado, please welcome Steve Hitz.
So there are no coincidences, I believe, in the world. 3 years ago, I met a man on a trip to Croatia who said, you have to meet my friend, Joseph Grenny. And so we met in Salt Lake City. My wife and I had breakfast together. 3 years later, Joseph's agreed to come and speak to you all. He's an amazing man. So it is my pleasure to introduce Joseph Grenny, a renowned social scientist and best-selling author. Joseph is the co-author of four New York Times bestsellers, including Crucial Conversations and Crucial Accountability. His work has been translated into 28 languages and has helped organizations around the world achieve new levels of performance by changing human behavior. In addition to his literary success, Joseph is a co-founder of the Other Side Academy, which I've visited 3 times now. I want to live there when I retire. A nonprofit organization dedicated to helping individuals with troubled pasts rebuild their lives. Through his work with the Other Side Academy, Joseph has shown the transformational power of leadership, empathy, and resilience. Please welcome Joseph Grenny.
Thank you. So it's been about 40 years since I sat where you sit. And all I really have to offer you today is one person's story of those 40 years. So I don't know that anything I'll share will be generalizable. I hope it is. I hope it's relevant to you in your lives. But I also want to ask your permission. I want to be both vulnerable and direct. And so I'm going to say things that are a little critical at times of how things are done in some places. It's one person's opinion. The other thing I want to do is be authentic with you about how I make decisions in my life. So I'll share some things on the spiritual side. My goal is not to try to evangelize. It's not to persuade you that my point of view is right, but it's just to be honest with you about how it works for me. Is that all right? Okay. All right. It's election day. We have Democrats and Republicans, so let me be me too. Okay? Here we go. So this picture should not exist. The picture that you see in front of you of Tiffany and Diego and Greg and Matthew and Tori really shouldn't exist. This picture shouldn't exist. The likelihood, if you went back 10 years, of all these people sitting in this place and looking the way they look was about 0. And one of the most important parts of the story I want to share is what led inevitably in that direction. So my work, as Steve suggested, has been involved with social science, particularly studying how human beings act in a business setting. So the 2 questions that have consumed me for my entire life are, number 1, why do you do what you do? Why do you behave the way you do? And secondly, if you wanted to do something different, what would it take? How do you help people change? So that's been the central preoccupation of my life, both as a family member, as a citizen in the community, as a member of the business community as well. And the way it started was I went to a university north of here, and my declared major when I arrived was physics. So that was the plan. And I had an opportunity to take an elective class, and so I did. The class was in the area of social science. And one day the instructor gets up and he says, hey, I want everybody for a part of your class to go out and do something in public to test how people would behave. And so this is where I went. Went to Shopko. And I decided that I wanted to pay attention to how people behaved in bathrooms. And so what I did was I interviewed people on the way into the bathroom, the men's bathroom in particular, and I asked, actually on the way out, I caught them on the way out and asked, did you wash your hands? So guess what percentage of people reported having washed their hands? All of them. Yeah, all of them did. Not a single person was willing to say, I've got nasty garbage on my hands and I want to shake yours. They weren't doing that. So 100% said they washed it. I knew that I could be a little skeptical because I've used toilets before myself. And so part 2 of the experiment was that I put out of order signs on one of the stalls and I sat there for a while and creepily watched as people finished and to see what percentage of them washed their hands. Now again, these are just men, so I'm not indicting the women here today. What percentage would you guess washed their hands? Do you want to know? Yeah, 50%. Only 50% of the men walking into the Shopko this particular day washed their hands. And then I wondered, are there things that influence whether or not we wash our hands? You would hope, wouldn't you, that the thing that influences whether or not I wash my hands is my desire to not acquire diseases or pass them along to other people. You would think that would be the main predictor, right? But it wasn't. Anyone want to guess what the main predictor was? You know. It's sad. But what was the main predictor? So sitting there in the bathroom, I started tallying how many people washed their hands when they were alone versus what? Versus somebody else is in the bathroom. And the main predictor of whether or not they washed their hands was not whether they wanted to be clean, it was whether they wanted to look clean. They just didn't want somebody thinking bad thoughts about them, even though they should be thinking bad thoughts about them. And this was fascinating to me. It was amazing to discover that little tiny twist and how our behavior is shaped, and I changed my major, and it changed the trajectory of my life. And in the course of my life since, I've learned 4 things that I hope have some value for you today. And I just want to share my story and then a little bit about how I came to these conclusions. So number 1, it's about becoming, not having. This might be controversial in an entrepreneurship class in the business school, but I'm going to take a strong stand on this one. Second, always respond to what I came to call in my life preparatory promptings. Forward is sometimes backward, and sometimes being consecrated is more important than being ambitious. And I'll talk about those as we move ahead. So, this is me many, many moons ago. So I earned the money in my first entrepreneurial venture, which was a little computer company, to buy that suit. What do you think? Pretty sharp, huh? So not getting a lot of dates back in those days. And so I opened one of the first what were called bite shops. This was the very first chain of microcomputer stores in the world. And mine was in the Bay Area in California. And I would drive down the peninsula and I would buy computers from these guys. Anyone recognize them? Yeah, there you go. So we've got Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak here, and this is what their computer looked like when I first would purchase it. So it was a kit that you had to assemble. It was the Apple computer, $666. Sounds like a satanic number, but they did it anyway. And so when it was assembled, this is what it looks like. And so the little computer store that I opened, we were selling these devices mostly to hobbyists. We also had this sucker. I mean, does that make your mouth water? Didn't have a screen or anything. You could make lights flash, and you could put little machine code programs into it. But fascinating for hobbyists. And then this came out, and this changed my life. Now, my heart races still when I see this picture here on the right. This was the first computer that had a built-in screen, had a keyboard built in it, and it had 2 floppy disk drives with 32K of memory. And man, what can you do with that much memory? This was more than anybody had imagined you could ever have. And boy, we went crazy over this. Suddenly, the business market started to open up. And I don't say this as a brag, and you'll understand shortly why, I wrote some of the very first accounting software for that computer. And it was wonderful software. Do inventory, it would do accounts payable, accounts receivable, it would do profit and loss statements. And so I had to teach myself as a 16-year-old all those aspects of business and then put this together in software. And I would sell these suckers like hotcakes. I could sell the computer because I now had software that went on it and business people could use it. But I always knew one thing. I knew the total addressable market for this, for the software I'd created, was not the 5 or 10 that I sold a month. It was hundreds of people. And if I did one simple thing, I'd have access to that market. That one simple thing was I'd have to sit down on weekends and write documentation, user documentation for it. And no one was going to pay me to do that. Every time I sold one of these, I got a check. And I went and cashed that check, and I bought myself a fancy Lincoln Continental. Looked like a pimp driving through the Bay Area, but at 17, I thought that was pretty darn cool. And so I knew, though, that I could make millions, not thousands, if I just disciplined myself and wrote that software. And I never did. And about a year later, a company called Peachtree Software came out with a crappy version of what I had done and sold millions of copies and made a fortune. And I always remembered that. I always remembered that it was my character deficit that kept me from real success. That if I had just been a little bit different in my life, that more would have been available. So, number one, I think the most important thing I hope you're working on acquiring is character while you're here. Not just knowledge. It's not just about stuff you can do, it's about who you are as a human being. And I fell short in some ways that had a big effect on my potential. The second is always respond to what I came to call preparatory prompting. So Winston Churchill once said that to each there comes in their lifetime a special moment. And it may have already come to you. It will come in multiple forms in the future. When they're figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered the chance to do a very special thing, unique to you and fitted to your talents. And then he gives this cautionary addendum to it. What a tragedy if that moment finds them unprepared or unqualified for that which could have been their finest hour. I believe that life prepares you. Thoreau said that you live your life forward, but you only really understand it backward. It isn't until you get to my age and a little later, you look back down through your life and you start to see how there was a theme, how life kind of prepared you for those special moments and challenges. And it certainly has for me. But the thing you have to get good at doing, I believe, is responding to those promptings. Here's the form they usually come in. So in my life, it's come in the form of somebody saying, hey, here's an article you ought to read. Or there's a book you ought to look at. Or I'll run into something. There's a class on campus, and I'll have a feeling about it. I'll have this sense that I really ought to go study that. Most of us shrug it off and move on. If I've been good at one thing in my life, and I haven't been good at a lot of things, but there's one thing I've been disciplined about, and that is when I start to have a sense about something, I write it down, and I put it on my list, and I make sure I follow through. Sometimes it's people that somebody say that you should meet. You ought to take them to lunch. And it always comes out of the hide. You never have time for it. The question is, though, will you put it to the top of the list and will you get it done? These were some that did that for me. This book came to me and I had a feeling about it. That article, all of the work of Jim Gross at Stanford, sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, learn this. And sometimes it's not for 10 or 20 years until you understand why that tap on the shoulder came. This book as well. So one of the taps on the shoulders that eventually came to me, I was working in a job that paid more than I ever thought I would make. I was working for Stephen Covey, and the first few years that I worked for him, the company was in dire straits. But eventually we got on our feet, and right about the time that I was getting married, I had this overwhelming sense that I should quit. And that what I needed to do was go out and learn something much different than what I was studying with Stephen. That my mission in life was to figure out all I could about the topic of influence, why people do what they do, and how to help them change. It scared the crap out of me. I finally had a reasonably steady paycheck. And now I was being asked, with 2 small children at home, another on the way, and a wife that was depending on me to bring some of this home to support our family. And in the middle of all of that, I was asked to quit. And I did, because I know what those feelings are like. And I know when it's me and my ego, and I know when it's something else that's calling me to do something important. And so over the next 15 years or so, I tried to look for those that had done this really well. I found some remarkable people. I found this guy in Thailand. His name is Dr. Wiwat Rojanapithayakorn. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I was interested in him because he'd figured out how to get 60 million country people in his own nation to change their behavior in order to save lives from the AIDS infection. Had a profound influence. Ingrid Munro I found in Kenya. She had gotten hundreds of thousands of women out of poverty with no other tool than just influence, helping them change some habits. I found Garth Jaffet in South Africa. I found Kevin Trepanian. I also found Dr. Donald Berwick in Boston here in the U.S., saying if you could just change the behavior of healthcare workers, you could save people from medical mistakes. And he'd had a remarkable influence. So I studied their work and I found that all of them did it the same way. I started learning things. I developed with my colleagues this model of explaining why people do what they do and how to help them change, particularly in large organizations or large social systems. But there was one person missing from the study. I had that tap on the shoulder. I had that sense that there was one other category of influence I needed to study, and that was criminal recidivism. Why do people commit crimes? Why do they get caught in a lifestyle that's so self-destructive and miserable? And how could you help them change? And the more I looked around, the more I found people that were offering programs that looked nice but accomplished nothing. In fact, the vast majority of our social services do very little. It's well-intended people with really bad strategies. So I went back to the person I always go to ask what's working out there. It's this guy here. He died about 2 years ago. This guy was a living legend. His name is Albert Bandura, the most cited psychologist of all time. So if you've heard of Freud or Jung, pale in comparison in citations to this guy. One of the most influential psychologists ever. And he was a mentor to me for many years. So I went to him and I said, who's doing the best work? He says, oh, you don't have to get on a plane and go out of the country this time. He says, just jump in your car and drive up to San Francisco. And there you're going to meet this woman. Her name is Mimi Silbert. So Mimi in 1972 started an organization called Delancey Street. This is one of those tap-on-the-shoulder moments, and you'll see as you look back with me why. So Mimi had started this place. Have any of you been to San Francisco before? Raise your hand. So if you've been there, you've probably driven by this. It's right on the Embarcadero. Beautiful property overlooking the bay. 300,000 square foot facility that you would imagine if you drove by. It's probably owned by tech millionaires. But it's not. It's a bunch of criminals. So this entire facility was built hammer and nails by criminals. It supports itself. Inhabiting this when I first encountered them was about 500 people with long histories of crime, addiction, and homelessness. And it was better run than any organization I had ever studied. It was an amazing place. For somebody that studies organizations, it was mind-blowing. I work with some of the smartest people on the planet, the most intelligent and successful business people with awful cultures, with horrible behavior happening in their organizations. And this place kicked their butts. And so we wrote the book. We gathered what we had, we started to share it with the world, and I thought, there we go, I'm done. I was told to learn everything I could about influence, and I've done it. And then the disasters started to happen. I've learned in my life that frequently backward is forward. That sometimes the best step forward is for you to lose a whole lot of what you thought that you had. Here's one of the losses. So these are two of our boys. And for any of you who have been parents or will be parents, you'll know this moment. This moment where you hold this little person and you imagine wonders for them. All of the terrific things that could happen in their lives. And for our boys, that didn't happen. They became mugshots. They got into drugs and started into criminal activity and both encountered incarceration. And it opened us to a world that we would never have thought we could ever have encountered. But even worse than that, not worse than that, almost as bad as that, our company was in a bankruptcy. So back in 1999, 1998, the tech bubble was swelling up. And we thought if we didn't get acquired by a bigger company, we'd probably get left behind, so we sold our company. And that company, within a couple of years, was bankrupt. And it was terrifying. It was heartbreaking. This thing that we'd built for 11 years was now caught up in this awful disaster. This was the moment that at the sheriff's auction, we bought back some of our assets. I had to mortgage my house. We had to scrape together resources to try to buy things that we thought. This is our head of sales because we had no heating system in winter with a blanket he had to bring, smiling and dialing and trying to restart the company, get things back on their feet. This was 3 of the most miserable months of my life when we had total uncertainty about what the future would hold. But everything good in my life that's happened since then started in that moment. It happened because we had lost everything. And so when I went to work every day, we sat with a big white blank flip chart and thought, what do we do? How do we restart this thing? And we realized we'd learned something. We'd learned some things in the previous 10 or so years. I started harking back to that early failure and realizing that living a life where if you don't pay me for it, I don't do it, that not being able to discipline myself to do the things that I knew needed to be done would rob me of the potential of my future. And so we started to write a book. Nobody was going to pay us to do it. We had no idea if it'd be a terrific failure or not. But one of the things we had learned that I'd urge you to take a picture of right now and reflect on, for any of you that have an organizational leadership responsibility, this is 35 years of learning in one PowerPoint slide. what we came to understand is that the health of every relationship in your life, the health of the teams that you're a part of, even the health of the organizations that you care most about, is a function of one simple thing. And that is the average lag time between when people see it and when they say it, between when they feel it and when they discuss it, between when it's a concern and when it's a conversation. We've come to understand that all those relationships, think about roommates, think about people that you have a romantic interest in. To the degree there are things that you're concerned about and not talking about, what happens in the relationship? That's the central dynamic that corrupts a relationship, that undermines trust, that promotes game playing and passive-aggressive behavior, and all the mischief happens then. So I'm not going to go into detail in that, but that's what led us in the direction of studying how people talk about these uncomfortable things. And we ended up writing a book. We wrote a book called Crucial Conversations. Would not have happened had the bankruptcy not occurred. We were making too much money. Life was too good. All the easy stuff was happening to us. Now, interestingly, the book was published in June of 2002, but our first meeting with our publisher was in September of 2001 in New York City. Anyone get the picture? What happened in September of 2001 in New York City? Yeah, so literally the week after that, we were to travel to New York City and have a meeting with the publisher. Smoke was still coming out of the World Trade Center site while we sat in McGraw-Hill's offices and talked to them about this book. And we felt like the world was falling apart. My first question to the publisher was, what's the worst-selling book that you've ever published? We just wanted to make sure that we just sold one more copy than that one. We had modest goals. And they said it was a book called People Who Spontaneously Combust. Have you heard of that before? Apparently there are people who can be walking along across the campus and they burst into flames. That's what the book is about. And they said they'd sold 3,000 copies of that book, so our goal was 3,001. And to our absolute surprise, it turned out the world needed the book. And it started getting pulled out into the marketplace, and it became a bestseller. We were worried about selling 3,001 copies, but then it started to do really well. So this was us back in 2003, shortly after the book came out, and eventually it reached 1 million in sales after making the bestseller list. And then it reached 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And then what happens is you start to get distracted from your mission. You know, the company starts to grow. This was us when the book first came out, and then about a year or two afterwards, and after that, and it continued to grow and grow and grow, and the idea caught on, and finally celebrities started talking about the book. Do you recognize the woman on the left?
You know? Do you know what really helped me? Crucial Conversations.
What's that one?
It's about like how to approach a conversation that you need to have. And it could be, there's like different chapters. It could be work, it could be love life, it could be children, it could be friends, it could be therapists. Just, sometimes we come in like you could be like imagining a scenario, right? You have to go and talk to your boss, or you have to go and talk to I remember I did it with my dad when I went to go and see him when he was sick. And in my head, I was like, I just know it's going to be like this, it's going to be like that. And I remember my friend said to me, everything that you think is going to happen is not going to happen. It'll be the opposite. He was like, the colour of the front door is probably going to be different to last time you were there. And it was just, and when I got there, pumped myself right up, ready to go and be like, ah! And I got there and the door was a different colour, right? And it threw me off, because that's what my friend had told me.
Yeah.
And how you approach a situation is what decides the outcome. You know, so if you go in hot-headed, steaming in, you're going to have to leave steaming out, as opposed to going in being like, I don't know what's going to happen and I'm open to what's going to happen.
Presence, that's the one.
That really, really helped me. It's crucial how I approach a conversation that I need to have.
Who is she? Yeah. So kind of cool, right? Kind of cool to have Adele saying, Crucial Conversations saved my marriage. That's the thing that turned my life around. And good stuff starts to happen when those things occur. I got invited onto really big stages, had the opportunity to speak in many different forums around the country. And you get kind of full of yourself, and you can get a little distracted. We purchased an office building, and the company grew wonderfully, and it was nice to drive to work and have a parking spot right in the front and get the car I wanted to drive, and our family was out of debt. But the problem is, your purpose in life is not to be successful. It's not to be ambitious. Your goal is to make a difference. That's why we're on the planet. And it's easy to forget that when the good stuff starts happening. When the bad stuff happens, oh yeah, we get humble and we start to introspect. But then we figure we got life hot-wired. And so, the final lesson I want to share is that you're here for a purpose. even if you're an entrepreneur, one of the things that sickens me the most, and please don't take offense unless you should, but one of the things that sickens me the most is when I talk to people who are early in their life and I say, what do you want to do? And they say, I want to start a business. To me, that's like prostitution. What I mean by that is it's using the thing for a purpose that it wasn't intended for. Businesses don't exist so that you can get wealthy. They exist so that you can bless lives. That's why they're supposed to exist. And if they do bless lives, if they do perform a useful function, then you get rewarded. And isn't that wonderful? I got nothing against making a profit. And we ran our companies carefully so that we could try to take care of our families and provide a wonderful living for the people that work for us as well. But I started to get ambitious rather than consecrated. Consecrated means there's a higher purpose. There's something bigger that we're supposed to be doing. Well, as I shared with you, we had some struggles with our boys. And that's when the consecration reminder began. So I want you to look at the dates here, because when you start to focus on why you're here on this planet and the problems that you're uniquely suited to solve, miracles happen. Absolute miracles. There's some that will try to describe it in some terms that have to do with God and some terms about the cosmic universe. You pick whatever story that works for you. But I can tell you, at least in my own life experience, that when you start doing the right thing, things happen that take advantage of that unique preparation that you've gotten. So in March of 2014, my son was incarcerated. He was going to do about a year in county jail in Utah County. And one day a new guy lands in his jail cell. His name is Zach Fawcett. Zach Fawcett lands having served over a decade of his life in prison already and in jail. And he also arrived having led the police on a high-speed chase through Pleasant Grove, Utah. He didn't want to get caught this time because he knew he would probably be busted and put away for so long that he wasn't willing to do it. He wanted the cops to kill him. He was high on meth. He had a car full of guns and forged documents and drugs. And so he raced out of control. Unfortunately for him, at least in that moment, they were able to pop his tires, taser him, and drag him to jail. He lands in a cell with my son. So this was the first picture that came out of his arrest. This was his second arrest in his lifetime as a criminal. This was his third, and this was the last one. You see what happens after 10 years in the criminal justice system. We have a correction system, which is misnamed, that is perfectly designed to create criminals. Once you get into that system, lots of people never find their way out. Now, I'm not saying they didn't deserve punishment. I'm not saying that the public doesn't deserve safety. Don't get me wrong on that. But if you were to design a system so that you could help people become not just an early criminal, but an advanced criminal, our criminal justice system is the perfect system. It's a great influence process. So one day I got this letter from Zach Fawcett. He had read a book I wrote called Influencer. And in that book, he read about a place called Delancey Street. And he reached out and pled, saying, even before I got arrested, I just wanted to go back to prison. He said, I was in so much pain, even drugs couldn't numb the pain. I didn't want to be part of life anymore. I've done 12 out of the last 16 years of my life incarcerated. There's something wrong with me. Getting arrested was the best thing that ever happened to me. And he said, if you let me out of here tomorrow, I'm going to go right back to it. Can I go to Delancey Street? Well, here's where the miracles begin. It just so happened that he landed in a cell with a guy whose dad wrote a book. He read the book. He reached out to that guy's dad. It just so happened that that guy's dad had a brother-in-law who was the county attorney. This is Jeff Buman. In June of 2014, after getting that letter, I called Jeff. And I said, Jeff, would you ever let a guy like this go to Delancey Street? He said, absolutely. He said, we need alternatives to incarceration. I said, well, let's try it. And he goes, oh, no. He goes, not that guy. He said, this guy's case is going to move so quickly through the system that it's going to take us a year or more to get judges and prosecutors and adult probation and parole and everybody else to agree. And so there's no way Zach Fawcett's going to Delancey Street. And I hung up the phone and thought I did what I was supposed to do. Did my honest best. And I had an overwhelming feeling that God wasn't happy with that answer. That more was expected of me. So I picked the phone back up and I said, could you please try? I got a call from Jeff 1 week later saying everybody agreed. It was a miracle. One of the most miraculous parts of it was this woman. Her name's Christine Scott. So Christine was the prosecutor assigned to Zach Fawcett's case. She said she was thrilled to get his case because she'd been a police officer about 16 years earlier, the first time Zach was arrested. And she said he was so violent and out of control that she started to draw her weapon and thought she was going to have to kill somebody in that moment. It traumatized her so much that when she became a prosecutor and a case for him came up, she said, "Give me that dirt bag." She said when Jeff came into her office and said, "Would you let him go to Delancey Street?" She said she stiffened and got enraged. He walked out of there and said, "It's your case. You do what you need to do." She said as the door swung shut, she had this overwhelming feeling that God didn't like that answer. And so she went to the jail and visited him. And she took on his case. And she started to advocate for him and helped him get to Delancey Street. This is Zach just before he was taken from Utah County Jail to Delancey Street. Well, just a few months after that involvement, the tap on the shoulder came again. My wife and I started feeling like there was more expected of us in this. We were uniquely suited and prepared to understand that model and see if it could be replicated. So we took 30 people with us, went out to Delancey Street in San Francisco in January. Do you see the timeline? Just months afterwards. We showed them the place, so we took judges and prosecutors, adult probation and parole, everybody we'd need to involve. And at the end of it, we took them to dinner in San Francisco and said, "Do you want this in Utah?" One by one, they went around the room, and every one of them said, "We'll do anything we have to. We need this in Utah." So now it's January 2015. We needed leadership. We eventually found a woman that had been at Delancey Street for 38 years who agreed to be an advisor to us. We flew her out in April of 2015. At the end of 2 days of meeting, we said, "Would you come out here and help us start this?" She said, "No way." She said, "After 38 years, I need to be with my children and grandchildren and others, and so I need to do something else." She said, "But I got a call 2 days ago from a guy named Dave DeRocher." She said, "If I were to pick one leader of all those I have been with at Delancey Street to lead this, it would have been him." He called me 2 days ago and said, "I need to get back to saving lives. I'm making money, life is good, but it's not feeding my soul." So we met him.
When I went to jail the first time where I was fighting a case when I was looking at going to prison, it was for a large amount of methamphetamine and firearms, and the end result was 2 years. I got out for 60 days after that term, got in trouble again for the same exact thing, and went back to prison for 5 more years. Got out another 2 months, went back to prison for 6 years, got out after that term and went back to prison for 10 years. And soon after that term, I had gotten in trouble again, only this time I was looking at 29 years, which in essence would have been the rest of my life.
He had spent 22 years incarcerated already. He was on his way to a 29-year prison sentence when he had a chance to go to Delancey Street. He stayed his 2 years at Delancey Street and then became a person he could have never imagined possible. He stayed 6 more years because he loved saving lives and finally had graduated and left. Well, we called him up and we said, "Could we meet you in Los Angeles?" This is at LA Live at the Staples Arena, and we flew down there, and I remember walking into the restaurant thinking, I don't know what this guy looks like. You know, what does somebody who served 22 years in prison look like? And most everybody in LA Live looked like that. And so it was hard to pick him out. But we walked into the door and there was a guy in a white shirt and tie sitting ramrod straight, and I just knew. I've interviewed hundreds of people for jobs over the years. And most of them, you don't even know at the end of the interview if it's the right person. This guy, all I had to do was look at him, and we knew where he belonged. We then started with him recruiting a couple of people that have been at Delancey Street, holding meetings at our house to try to encourage people to help and support this effort. September of this year. Do you see the timeline? What life does is it takes decades to prepare you, and then it takes months to launch you. When you've honored your preparatory promptings, at the point where it's finally going to all come together, it happens fast and in miraculous ways. So this is Alan and Lola and Dave. September 1st of 2015, we're able to purchase a beat-up old mansion in downtown Salt Lake City and start. And then the miracles began. We got a bench, which is the place people sit when they want to be interviewed to come to the academy. We purchased this house that was a little threadbare and worn, but it was a perfect place and designed just as though it was for us. Our worry was we wouldn't be able to expand. But fascinatingly, people started to arrive and miracles started to happen. We saw lives begin to change. And one of the things that you have to do to make a program like this work is you got to be an entrepreneur. You got to be able to start businesses because the government doesn't pay anything for people to come here. The insurance companies don't pay. Mom and dad doesn't pay. They don't pay. They got nothing. And so the people that need it the most have the least capacity to pay. And we have, frankly, a rehab sector that is evil. We have a sector that tries to serve this population that's designed based on a funding model rather than a therapy model. It's designed based on how much people can afford to pay rather than what their need is. How many, by show of hands, how many of you think if you've been shooting heroin for 20 years that a 30-day program is going to fix it? Anybody want to venture a affirmative vote on that? Yeah, it's ludicrous, isn't it? But it's what's offered up by the courts and by the government, by insurance companies every single day. And so entrepreneurs continue to start these because they can make money at them, and they're part of the crime. We shouldn't be making it money at something that does not bless lives, that's not accomplishing a mission. Your reward should be the second consideration, not the first. Today there are 250 people between our two campuses, between Salt Lake City and Denver. And collectively, this population would be serving over 2,000 years incarcerated if they weren't at the Other Side Academy right now. And there's some marvelous things we've gotten to see. In addition to expanding ourselves, we've been able to teach others to start this model. Our goal is to help there be a bench in every city in the world that wants one. And we've watched people like Zach who've been able to find a different life by staying long enough in a place because they can, because they don't have to come up with $25,000 a month to do it. Instead, what do? They change. They stay. This is Tiffany when she arrived. Tiffany last week on Halloween Day was married. She was married to another graduate of the Other Side Academy. Is a remarkable woman helping us lead what's called the Other Side Village now. Matthew is an entrepreneur, leads a business called Sims Motorcycle Monkeys in Salt Lake City, doing wonderfully and married to another graduate. Diego, when he arrived, had stabbed a homeless person to try to get status in his gang. He was just a gang punk that was on his way to a worthless life. Today he runs the Other Side Movers, one of our social enterprises, a multi-million-dollar business, completely different place in life. This was what I was built to do. I was prepared for decades in advance to be a little part of what's happening here. Tori was married just about 2.5 years ago, and I got to perform the wedding. So if any of you are interested, I'm Justice of the Peace Joseph, and happy to be part of it. But to another graduate as well. And guess who the bridesmaids were? They'd all be incarcerated. But these wonderful, strong, ethical, intelligent women were instead part of this wonderful celebration. You can see Greg's life etched on his face here. This was Greg before he left to Denver to start another campus of the Other Side Academy. So I want you to think to yourself, if you had 150 criminals that you were going to start a business with, what kind of business would you start? And most of us don't do that. Most of us think that we want to try to select well so that they'll execute well, right? Well, that's not the key. You don't just select well, you got to create a culture. In 7 years, these 150 criminals at the Other Side Academy have accomplished some remarkable things. 74 to 92% of graduates, depending on how long they stay, are drug-free, crime-free, and employed today after being at the Other Side Academy. 100% are employed when they graduate. This group of people went to the Grand America Hotel in Salt Lake City about 5 years ago, and there are 3 women in this picture. 2 of them are longtime felons, and 1 is my wife. Can you guess which is my wife? Maybe you saw her coming in, so that's her, but what I love about that picture is you wouldn't tell the difference if it weren't for other sorts of clues. They look like they belong there. They sat in this room and were jittery as the announcement of who was going to win the Entrepreneur of the Year award, one of the most prestigious awards for business in Utah.
Of the year for the social entrepreneur category.
And the award goes to Dave DeRocher.
And the woman opens this up and she says, the Other Side Academy. And you could have heard the screaming here in Cedar City. You imagine what redefines your place in society. What changes a life? What changes a life is when you do something you didn't think you were capable of doing previously. That's how lives change. They don't change by sitting with a workbook or a counselor somewhere, figuring out what happened to you earlier in life. That may be important work as part of the process, but this is what it eventually has to become. We've started 4 world-class social enterprises. The Other Side Movers, the #1 rated moving company in the entire state. We started the Other Side Storage. Again, the reviews are just kind of out of control, positive everywhere you look. We've started through 2 thrift boutiques, a construction company. Our students generated $11 million in revenue last year. These are not little hobby businesses. These are serious operations. The Other Side Academy is completely self-reliant. And what do we know about how to build that kind of a culture? That's it. That's how you get imperfect people to accomplish extraordinary things. And that's the definition of leadership. The definition of leadership is influencing imperfect people to work together to accomplish something extraordinary. And at the Other Side Academy, that happens because the lag time is as close to 0 as possible. Tonight at 7:30, 5 different groups of 25 people are going to sit in a circle just like this. And what are they going to do? They're going to give each other honest feedback. They're going to let you know if you're lazy or selfish or lustful, if you've got a bad attitude or you do sloppy work. The lag time is as close to 0 as possible because twice a week we sit down and we clear the decks. We get the unfinished business out of the way.
You know when we went down there what happened. And I trust you, and this is the kind of you give me in return. You throw me under the bus, I get called into court and question my integrity that I've been working on so hard, and you just blow it right there. Now I have to prove to the staff and everyone else that I didn't.
You know what? You know what's Greg, is that you won't listen to what he's bringing you, man. He cares about you. We all care about you, and you're sitting over there. I didn't do that. I don't remember that.
You're right. Hey, Russell, you're right, man. I'm sorry, man. I did that.
When you and I wonder, how can you talk to people about uncomfortable things? This is how you do it. He bluntly tells him, you're a thief and you blame me and I resent you for doing it. Goes back over to Greg, and Greg's going to say, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. He says, somebody else did it. They set me up. And he says, oh, well, F you. And then it goes over to here to him. And he says, why aren't you listening? We love you. We're trying to help you. And watch what happens to him. You see the body language change. You see his shoulders drop. And he says, you're right. You're right. I did it. And his life changes in that moment. The way lives change is when truth gets through. And the only way truth gets through is if there's a context of love. All we do at the Other Side Academy extraordinarily well is truth and love. You got to do both. If you do love without truth, it's permission. If you do truth without love, it's just brutality. It's self-serving. Truth and love together change lives. And that's how you reshape souls. In that moment, he began to change. That's why 88% of our graduates remain crime-free. They've been in that kind of an environment where the lag time is as close to 0 as possible, and you can't keep deceiving yourself about who you really are. 96% of our 3-year graduates are drug-free, crime-free, and employed. This is how it works. This is what my life has been about, learning about why people do what they do and how to help them change. So the last thing I want to share with you is this miracle has expanded exponentially. Tomorrow, is it tomorrow? Today's Tuesday, right? Day after tomorrow, the village will begin. So those of you who have lamented what happens to the homeless, who've looked on the streets and thought, what can I do to help? After today, you don't have to ask that question anymore. So this is Jen, just a few days before she arrived at the Other Side Village. What would you do to help her? If you wanted to help a woman like that, you saw her beaten and thrashed on the street. You saw her out of control screaming at a stop sign, face down in a ditch. How do you help? Most of us get it wrong. We think what we need to do to help is just transfer assets, right? Give her some food, give her some money, give her some housing. That's not how you change lives. The way you change lives is you create a community. This is what the first steps to building will happen on Thursday. So the first homes will be placed on site for the Other Side Village, which is a 400-home community for the chronically homeless, with the same kind of culture of 0 lag time that we have at the Other Side Academy. It will be self-reliant. It will be self-funded within 2 years. Through social enterprise, it creates opportunities for employment on site. And this is the ultimate plan. This is kind of the downtown part. This is the residential part. And check it out on the website, and you can learn a little bit more about the uniqueness of the design. But the plan is to build 430 homes, ultimately housing about 600 of the chronically homeless, usually with significant mental health challenges. And who would you have lead that? Who would you have be the staff? Well, this is our staff. But our staff are credible because they live the very lives of the people that they're trying to influence. This is them today. So, this is Felicia when she arrives. This is Felicia today, Robbie and Tiffany and Mo. Mo lived for 10 years in the Tenderloin in an elevator shaft. His cycle every day was to rob the houses in the apartments in his complex and then go back and buy drugs and then hide in the elevator shaft and repeat the next day for 10 years. How do you help somebody like that? Do you give them an apartment? Do you give them a hygiene kit? Do you hand out socks? Is that what you do? That's not the problem. The problem is learning to live life differently. So right now in the Other Side Prep School, there are about 20 people preparing to live in the village. For 6 to 12 months, they live in an environment of high accountability. And what do? They're opening the Other Side Donuts. Next time you're in Salt Lake, stop on by. It's the best donut place in the entire state, and we have proof of it. So this is Gideon, who was 19 years on the streets and homeless, who now runs the donut store. This is how you redefine your place in the world. This is how you become a different person. While he's there, people recognize if he's lazy, if he has a bad attitude, if he's got a short temper, if he doesn't get along with people, if he isolates, and then he gets feedback, and then he comes back to work the next day and he tries again in that kind of supportive environment. They've created these marvelous products. Why? Because they live in a zero lag time environment where people tell you if it sucks, where people let you know if it's no good. And we kill it, we put a bullet in it, and we try something different the next day. We decided 2 years ago when we opened the donut shop that we wanted to see where we stack up against the best donut makers in the entire state. So if you don't know, the competition takes place at Thanksgiving Point in Salt Lake City every July or so. It's called the Dough Show. And we thought, we'll probably lose. We'll be at the bottom of the rankings, but we're just going to give a go so that we see who the competition is out there. Well, they freaking won. This was their entry to it. It had a Utah theme with the bee and a little bit of the meringue there and all that, and it was absolutely delicious. And the coolest thing is, it wasn't the Judge's Choice Award. You just got to manipulate 6 people to get that one. They won the Crowd Favorite Award, which you got to get 1,000 people to agree to give you that prize. Imagine what it would feel like to be Gideon standing there getting that. That's how lives change. It's by you living in an environment where people expect more of you. Don't give you more, they expect more from you. And then when you start measuring up for that, you get to feel the pride of having actually accomplished something. So how do you help Jen? You do exactly that. Jen graduated from the prep school and will be one of the first to get a home in the Other Side Village that will be placed on Thursday. But she's been working for over a year on becoming, not just having. Not just getting stuff, but on becoming the kind of person that can do it. So that's my story. I hope something in there is useful to you, and I'm happy to answer a few questions in the remaining 90 seconds. So, thank you. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yes?
So I think you set this up to be self-sustaining, and are you ramping this up as big as you can get it? Or
Yeah.
how does that work?
Yeah, he says, are we ramping this up? The goal is to not just create a village, but a model. And not just create an academy, but a model. And make it replicable. So we already have 3 replications out there of the academy. The village, once it's at about 60 to 80 homes, we intend to invite the world. We want to make a lot of people uncomfortable who are destroying lives by, in well-intended ways, doing it wrong. By actually robbing people of the opportunity for growth. And so, yeah, that's the full intent. Yeah, good question.
So it's perpetual.
Yeah. Did I hear South Africa? Is that the accent?
No, I'm Australian, yeah.
Australian, sorry about that.
no,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, different part of the world. Yeah.
Not that serious.
Yeah.
What happened to your son?
Thank you for asking. So for our boys, it's been an unsteady path upward. Life is better today than it was 15 years ago, and life is still imperfect. And isn't that life? So we'll continue to persist in those relationships, and we're pleased with progress, and we're all here for each other. Yeah, thank you for asking. Please.
Your sons go to the academy?
So the academy was open after they kind of needed some help. We had one recently that we wished would have gone there. He went to a rehab for the first time, and we'll see how that goes. And he seems to be doing well coming out of that. Some people do. If you've got very little to fix and you got a whole lot of assets and resources, sometimes that can work, and we're praying it does. And I think we're at time, so do I turn it back to you, Tyler?
Well, do you mind if I ask you a question too?
We're out of time. Sorry about that. I'm on a clock here.
So is it the case that if a city develops an effective way of dealing with homeless people, won't that just invite more? Is that a concern for you?
Yeah. So his question is, if you deal with homelessness effectively, don't more homeless just find their way to your place? It depends on the solution. If it's a solution that requires a lot of work to get to a better place, it tends not to create a bum's rush. If what you're doing is a bunch of giveaways, then yeah, it's like the piñata cracked open and everybody's going to rush into the candy. And in most places, that's what we do. It's just we hand out this, and there is a network. There are online resources for people that are homeless to find out the places with better weather and easier resources to access, and it happens. But we're at fault. It's not them. It's a market, and we created the market. We need to change it.
Thank you. So we are out of time. Let's.
I said that. I already said that.